Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of the second edition of Land of the Rising Sun for the fifth edition of Chivalry and Sorcery from Britannia Game Designs Limited. This is written by Lee Gold with artwork provided by Lizanne Lake, Andrew Hepworth, and Grace Turner. This 316-page hardcover is available now, carries an MSRP of £35, which equates to approximately $44.99 here in the US. You can, of course, grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $19.99. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the second edition of Land of the Rising Sun. Now, a couple of things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, I did receive this as a review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, very important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a good feel for what you're going to find inside the Land of the Rising Sun second edition. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a peek at the credits page because lots of folks worked very hard at bringing this to life. The first edition of Land of the Rising Sun came out in the 1980s, and that was back when Chivalry and Sorcery was produced by Fantasy Games Unlimited, otherwise known as FGU. And back at that point in time, I actually would pick up some of the FGU games that were out there. So I had Bushido, really liked a lot. I had Space Opera. Got to be honest, I never picked up Chivalry and Sorcery. So, of course, the original first edition came out in the 1980s. Do want to point out that this is kind of a reworking of that first edition as opposed to completely rewritten. So if you are thinking, oh, wow, this is just a whole new text, that doesn't seem to be the case because just reading through this, some of the presentation does read as if it's from the 1980s as opposed to a more modern approach. Now, having said that, keep in mind, this hardcover clocks in at 316 pages, which is about twice the length of the original first edition. So there is lots of new content in here. Don't think that this is just a rehash. It is not. There's a lot of new content inside the second edition of Land of the Rising Sun. It's just some of this content feels like it's been reworked. So if you follow the Gaming Gang and maybe you've seen a lot of my live streams, you know I've talked about Bushido from FGU in the past and how much I really liked that role-playing game system, which is kind of surprising that FGU would have also had Land of the Rising Sun for Chivalry and Sorcery. But there is so much in this that is far more historical in scope than Bushido. So Bushido was a fantasy Japan. In fact, it was a fantasy Nippon, and it did draw from a lot of the legends and myths of Japanese history. This, at least from my recollections, is coming across as being far more steeped in the historical aspects while still bringing you fantastical elements also. If you have checked out my review of Chivalry and Sorcery, you know I was very impressed, although its complexity level is not something that at this point in time in my gaming career I would want to get stuck in with. But it is certainly a very, very well researched and very well put together role playing game. This is no exception as far as this new edition of Land of the Rising Sun. In fact, The reality is, I like this book better than the core book of Chivalry and Sorcery. It's important to note you do need to have the CNS core book in order to use this book. Even though, as we're flipping through here, you can see there is tons of character creation information. You're going to see some changes to some of the rules. We're going to get more detail as far as rules for the Japanese setting. So you still do need to have the core book, though, because that's going to cover a lot of the key elements like core mechanics of action resolution and combat and so forth. Now, as someone who probably knows a bit more about Japanese history and mythology than maybe the average gamer, I will say that all of this is presented very respectfully as far as I can tell. I am not a student of Japanese history and culture and mythology and legend, nor do I come from the culture. So it is possible there's some things in here that people will take issue with. As far as I can tell, I don't think that would be the case. So we are going to get a lot of information about just life in this fantasy Japan. We get a lot of breakdown as far as the history of this fantastical Japan. Really interesting stuff. We get a huge section devoted to new magic, which ties into the different aspects of Japanese mythology as well as Japanese religion. So I like that quite a lot. And I would say about a third of the page count is devoted to all this new magic. We get a lot of page space also devoted to society and how society operates and how it's different than European society and European feudalism. We will get some information about various different types of NPCs. So we get stat blocks for many of the various different archetypes, which are covered earlier in the book. Something else I thought was really cool is you do not have to play as a human. So there are opportunities for the players to take on the roles of non-humans, which I thought was very cool. Like that quite a bit. We do get a bestiary as far as some of the legendary creatures. If you are familiar with Chivalry and Sorcery, you'll know that we don't get kind of standard stat block entries. We kind of get tables of information. So it's a little bit different, but we do get quite a bit of information about the various different spirits and Oni and so forth, the Kami, Buddhas. So really nicely done. Something else that I was very happy to see is we get an adventure. I was like, wow, we get an adventure. Now, funny enough, this adventure is actually converted from a Bushido adventure, which actually appeared in a British magazine back in the day. I believe it was a British magazine, Imagine magazine. So it was a Bushido adventure with notes about adapting the adventure for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So kind of cool. And of course, now this adventure is converted for Chivalry and Sorcery, Land of the Rising Sun. Like that quite a bit. I was kind of surprised to see that we got a little adventure in this. That was a very nice surprise. We get an appendix devoted to the pronunciation of various different words. We get kind of a glossary of Japanese words. I thought that was a nice touch. And then we have another appendix, which is devoted to the, I want to say, isn't it pronounced I Ching? It's not I Ching. I thought it's I Ching. I might be wrong. Probably am. Yeah, I told you, it's not as if I'm a student of Japanese history and culture and religion and stuff like that. Here is the glossary. I thought that was kind of cool. And then we will get an index. We get some maps, but these are nicely done too, that you can hand out to your players. And that wraps up a look inside the second edition of Land of the Rising Sun for the fifth edition of Chivalry and Sorcery. So let's swing on over to the other camera. I'm going to share some final thoughts and give this a review score. So, as I pointed out when I did my review for Chivalry and Sorcery, I was very impressed. I thought it was very well done, but the complexity level is just not something at my age I really want to delve into. But still, all in all, I really liked the core book for Chivalry and Sorcery. Same goes for this second edition of Land of the Rising Sun. In fact, I got to say, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I enjoyed reading this a little more than I did the core book for CNS. So there is that. I got to be very honest. There's a lot in this book that you can use for inspiration in other role playing games. If you are looking to run something which is a fantastical Japanese sort of role playing setting, there's a lot that you can crib from this book. And there are a lot of tables in this book that are equally applicable to other role playing games as well as Chivalry and Sorcery. So keep that in mind also. If you are in the market for this sort of genre, you might actually want to pick this up, maybe even just in PDF, to use as a source book for your role playing game of your choice outside of Chivalry and Sorcery. Of course, if you are a fan of Chivalry and Sorcery, you run Chivalry and Sorcery, this is a no brainer to add to your collection. I like this book quite a lot. So, on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the second edition of Land of the Rising Sun for fifth edition Chivalry and Sorcery a 9 out of 10. It is that good. And if you're interested in this setting for Chivalry and Sorcery, this is a must have. Really, really is. All right, that's it for this time out. If you liked the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit the newly redesigned thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.